All right, so truck 50 lower E7TE, otherwise 1987 truck engine. I made a longer version of this with um, one second, with my YouTube channel, which is all about the van project. But I wanted to do like a shorter video that was a direct upload. Like I share some things on Instagram, but not all of the details, not all of the technical stuff. Anyway, so yeah, truck lower, intake manifold. This is basically getting ported for this 306 build. This is a long runner intake manifold with the big plenum with the big dual throttle body. What that's for, longer runners are better for low end power. So the power on the top end, as far as horsepower, drops off a little sooner than a different style or maybe a single throttle body, because velocity and ports in your runners through the intake and the head are good for low end power. Like you want velocity, and a longer runner delivers that. The thing with this style though, and these top ports, like there's aftermarket, like the Holley Systemax 2 uses the same port opening as these dogleg style runners. And by dogleg, what it means are, instead of all of these being straight for the best possible CFM, you have like in the front here these dog legs that really restrict flow. Like for example, the number one runner here would be, I've seen it tested stock at about only 146 CFM. Ported out properly, it's good for about 246. So then it's on par with like a trick flow street heat or track heat. And you can see a majority of the work is in, you probably, maybe you can't see it here. So if you look at that little gray area, what that is cutting this dog leg, like straightening out that portion to the point where the aluminum opens a hole. And then I use, and others use epoxy like JB Weld, that also gets filled with aluminum shavings that come off of the intake itself. It's perfectly fine. The PSI, the strength of it, it'll be even stronger than the aluminum when it's done. So that's like the major thing with this, is straightening the dog legs. I think it's pretty self-explanatory what a dog leg is. It's not a term used that often. You used to hear it more in architecture. It's like a type of hull. I guess the best way, it's like if you think of a parallelogram is kind of the best way to describe it. So here's the thing, is you get through all of that, like you know that that's a portion of what to do. But in my situation was I got stuck because I had instinctive thoughts just about airflow dynamics and the physics behind not only like port energy and velocity, but also just overall CFM, which obviously sometimes, you know, that's not going to be dependent of a small area or pocket of velocity. That's something, you know, I could test with this anemometer with a pitot tube, but I don't exactly have a flow bench. So in that case, I had to turn to someone kind of an expert or pro that does it as a business. Like for me, I'm just doing this and getting the science around it to be able to do the job properly for this particular build. Is, I don't know if I'll really do it in the future, but I'm trying to do it the best way and proper as possible. So anyway, so number 5 runner here. You can see that's pretty nasty, right? Just like the one. It looks even worse, but I'm not sure. The other thing that is to note is the trucks use a 154 firing order. And the old 302s, well, also they changed the balance. Like an old 60s 302 uses a 28-ounce crank balance. Later models, they switched to a 50-ounce balance to create for like luxury cars. And basically like a softer or smoother running engine with a little more balance on it, which is, it's probably negligible. But they did change the balance and the firing order. So the 137 start of the sequence of the firing order stayed the same in 302 Windsors. The 137 stuck with the 351, but they changed the 302 to the 460 big block firing order, which starts with a 154. So what's interesting is the reason they did that was change from the 154, or maybe I said that backwards at the start. So 60s were 154, sorry, 302 in the 60s started with this firing order, then they switched to the 137 and late model EFI 50 Mustangs and stuff. The 154 is the 460 firing order, and they use that with the EFI 5 liters, right? So the thing with that is, what's interesting is they did that to keep load off of the front bearings. So if you're at the rear of the engine and you have either a flex plate or a flywheel, that's weight, but it's more balanced. Having the snout of the crank and the harmonic balancer just has a little bit more weight on the front main bearings, right? So every time you're firing, because these two fire in a sequence, it does technically put a load greater toward the front of the engine, and because of the crank setup. So that's part of why they went to 137. They also did it to spread the fueling more evenly. So it is technically the old school order. So what's interesting is that the worst runners are starting on that sequence, right? The other interesting thing is the 137 finishes on the 4th and the 8th cylinder, just like the truck would be firing on the 154. So I have kept that firing order, so the camshaft is ready for that. With EFI, you kind of have to stick with that. It's not just a matter of switching the distributor; the computer has it as well. But if you just have a carb, it is that simple. So if you had like, oh, I have a 137 cam that's more modern, like a letter cam, then you can put it in there. But that's just a whole other, thing to think about that I found interesting. So opening up 100 CFM out of just the front runners alone, because like number 3 will still run 200 plus because it's that straight. But opening these to mid 250s is incredible, because you could go to a pick and pull junkyard and basically find an F-150 from, I guess you would just call them the OBS, but basically like 86 or 7 up to like 95, and you would find these. Obviously this one's for a van and was in a van, but obviously the 50 and 58s are all the same. There's no difference between the van and E150 and F-150 basically. So anyway, so that was kind of the majority of what I thought, the job was, until I was really thinking about looking at the number 5 from the top, and I went, because I'll look at the inside wall on, say, like the number 7 here, and that's not really a big restriction. It's kind of like on the E7 heads, you have the dog leg going into the intake bowl, and the objective is to completely eliminate that, right? So your first instinct is to kind of, I have a laser here now, is kind of to wipe that section out, right? That seems pretty obvious. Straighten this out as much as possible, and obviously down there we have gotten rid of a major restriction. Lots of aluminum. Like this is a to-go cup filled with shavings that then I use for the epoxy. And that, I don't even know how much, like that's probably from one port alone, and that's again just on the outsides. But again, like you want to do that because then it's at the maximum potential. And people will go even further. They'll cut this whole section out, maybe just weld actual aluminum in. I've seen someone make a form and then just use epoxy. But anyway, so I did start shaving off maybe, I don't know, 20 thousandths or so, and then I stopped and wanted to ask someone their thought on it. Because I didn't want to kill velocity either, because this is going in a van. Velocity is still important for that low end power, even though inherently the inherent design of a long runner is still going to be better low end and a little less top end. So like, my transmission, I set it up to overstock. Stock shift valve at wide open throttle is about 4,500. So I've changed that valve diameter to be able to compensate to like 55, which I think this will still make power just over 5,000. I have seen like a 347 where it tops off at like 49, and then obviously the torque is just massive. Like even at 2,000, it's massive. But we are running a 3,000 stall converter in the transmission, so from 3,000 to hopefully like over 5,000 is it's going to have a really nice power band and get this thing moving. But anyway, so that was why I paused, and I had cut it. I did mark this with Sharpie so you could see the exact area. So basically the pinch, or the apex. But what someone told me was kind of like went against my original thought, because here's what I think. There's two things you have to know, right? You have to think about gravity, and then you have to think about the fact that engine is a vacuum, right? So an engine, like vacuum, is measured with a square inch of mercury, right? When you have a flow bench, you have a cylinder with mercury in it, and the flow, depending on what apparatus you're using, such as a shop vac or maybe something else to create that vacuum, is using the mercury against those values. And an engine vacuum runs at about anywhere from teens to high 20 inches of mercury. And obviously at gravity, it's just 1 inch, right? I'm showing my finger. There's about 1 inch. So that's the thing, right? To keep in mind, especially on the intake, the exhaust is a little bit different. So you're thinking about exhaust flow in regard to the pulses and the flow. But the thing about exhaust is it travels faster the hotter it is. So things like internal ceramic coated headers, like that's something I've done, or the whole exhaust helps create even more velocity, and you'll make more torque that way. So when you're mentally visualizing your exhaust, or, you know, like one particular port trick here, and you can kind of see it, is the scavenge plateau on the quench area. So this helps relieve some area. It picks up about 3% more horsepower. So there's a little difference from going to that and then going on the intake and not considering what the vacuum is. Okay. Where I think that came from is when you're a kid and you're at the beach, you'll like dig in the sand, let waves come in, let the water pool up, and then your objective is the velocity of the water leaving the beach back into the water. So you carve based on velocity. So what happens is when you go into stuff like this without thinking about that, is instinctively your mind is at that 1 inch of mercury, just gravity alone. Obviously, water has a completely different inertial mass than air mass that's being sucked through a runner. But here's why it's different. And I did do a demo on the other video. I'm not going to do it now, but I poured like some blue water through here to show the water line, which should be obvious to anyone, the kind of centrifugal force, or rather the inertia around the bend, that makes you think of maybe a water slide and needing an embankment. Or if you've ever made, you know, like roller coasters and Roller Coaster Tycoon, is you have to kind of have these instinctive physics in your head, like, oh, if I don't put an embankment there, it's going to lose momentum. And or many marble runs, Hot Wheels, etc. So that's kind of what ends up being in your head, like, oh, velocity, I need to shortcut this, right? Don't touch that, because that's going to slow it down and it doesn't make any sense. Here's where I was wrong on that, is when I asked, like I said, someone who I consult quite regularly, Charlie Servetio, who's really great, very skilled. He works with David Vizard on stuff, and that's kind of where I've learned most of my stuff. And his suggestion, or, you know, knowledge, told me, put a bulge on the outside wall. So we're taking material here, and he said, yeah, but put a bulge on the outside wall. And I'm sitting here thinking, like, wait, how does that make sense to almost make this more of an S turn? And this port also does have a sensor, which it's kind of It's not the most restrictive thing, but that's the other thing about runner number 5. But the thing is I was sitting there like, I'm like, wait, why doesn't that make sense? But here's the thing with vacuum is, while you could hog something out, if you want to see my other pair of heads exhaust, you'll see what I mean. If you want to like hog something out in certain spots, yes, you could hurt the flow. But what I realized on the intake especially, and being, even if you think about the point and purpose of what an intake plenum does beyond the throttle body, is the whole point of making more area in this turn is available air. So the whole point is all of your thinking of being a running engine, that you need all this velocity, and velocity is so important, don't get me wrong, but all of your knowledge that you think you know how the airflow dynamics are going to be set up in this, that, oh, I need to move the air through there, are potentially completely wrong. Because the whole point of doing that is available air. So instead of making, playing in the sand to make, water run back as fast as possible, the whole point here is creating puddling almost. And it seems counterintuitive. I was like, wait, this makes no sense to me. And then I said, duh, we're talking about, 25, 28 inches of mercury on vacuum. And you would think, well, yeah, you're working on an engine, right? Listen, once you start carving and you're spending like hours and hours, like this one doesn't take as long as the heads, but I want to say, I don't know, this could easily be at 15 or 20 hours. The heads are like 40. So that's still a lot, but it's easy to like just start going nuts and carving. But eventually you're like, wow, I've been out here a while. Then detail work. And now, realizing to make this perfect, I have to do those cuts. So it's just something to think about if you do not know that or don't think about that. But if you are porting, you have to remove your mind from, like I said, the inertial mass of water, a marble. Don't think of what your head tells you about roller coasters and rafts, because my plenum's kind of hard to pull up here. But if you know an intake plenum, the whole point of it is to not just have a lot of air. It's like air storage. And it also helps cool the charge, the more air that you can have available in the plenum. Obviously, plenums and such also can change your power band dynamics. Like I said, like runner length has a big part in that. There's things like phenolic spacers. I happen to have a 1-inch spacer. I probably won't run it because I'm worried it'll lower my peak power. Well, not the actual power, but where the peak power comes on a little too much. But you have a phenolic spacer. The objective there is to separate the intake to the plenum so that the air stays cooler in the plenum without heat transfer between the aluminum. So it acts as kind of an insulator, basically. Anyway, so here's the other thing. So in closing, I still end up talking. Like, it's so hard for me to get through everything I want to say. So I've done most of this job with just this ball nose. When you're carving aluminum, you want a single cut. I have cut aluminum with a double cut like this, but it'll eat up your carbide. And yeah, look at this tray of stuff. That's why, I need a lunch tray. If I had like a cafeteria lunch tray, that would be incredible for doing this stuff. Like, I have like a little toolbox and to keep all my stuff, but I really need like a bigger tray to hold some stuff. But check this out. See, usually you want to buy like a single item that's high quality, but all of my 1/8-inch burrs that were like $12 Chinese are still going, and they've gotten through like 2 heads. So, well, 4 heads, but 5 heads. No. So the thing is, usually I'll buy like one thing. So that was probably that single 6-inch, and then I I use a cutoff wheel and I carve these down so they're more manageable, and then the tip doesn't get any eccentricity, because sometimes that'll happen and you'll bend a shank and it's all over. But good night, nurse. But I found a set on eBay. See, Amazon doesn't always have the best deals. Like, I always view paying for Prime as kind of a waste in regard to, like, if you want video service, fine, but I see so many better deals on eBay. Like, I saved $10 by using eBay instead. But to get to that outside wall, like, this is what you'll run into when porting a lot is, oh, I have to stop and buy a tool. Like, if you're not equipped, if it's your first time, this entire RestoMod project has been that. Like, I didn't have any tools. It's probably, I don't even want to see what I've spent, and I've kept most of my receipts. But so for, like, I don't know, shipped to the door, it was like $23 for like a 6 set. And they have these great containers too with little hooks. Like, I love that, because my other ones haven't come with that at all. And I may cut these down, I may not. I think they're like a 6-inch shank. But yeah, this one, like, that's an egg and that's a ball. Like, those are really what you need for that inside. So that's stuff you'll run into. And then, like, I had to wait days for that to kind of get here. But I just wish I saw that deal, because even if this is the last time I do, you know, porting, or I don't build another engine or something like that, like, I still at least have these. And you can carve wood with these things, you know. They'll cut through many things, so it's not a bad thing to have. But, you know, I wasn't going to spend for individual ones, so save a little bit. I'm trying these new ceramic instead of the typical pink stone. Or no, these are still stone, not ceramic. I don't know what they are actually, but they're a little different. But these were really gonna come in handy for polishing the combustion chambers, because I am polishing my chambers to increase brake specific fuel consumption and have like a hotter burn. And then also, what was I gonna say? I am gonna polish the top of the pistons as well. It's kind of a trade-off. Like, I think I'll be okay, but I'm going for, you know, maximum efficiency and stuff. For the power, obviously, you want, you know, the least amount of fuel for the most amount of power. But yeah, with polishing, the only thing with that is potential, like, atomization changes of the fuel. But I think we should be okay. So I'm just gonna go for that, and it does take a bit, but I have like a whole box of. It's just definitely a process. So I didn't want to talk about this. Like, this wasn't on the agenda, but I have, like, this is my process for polishing the combustion chamber, obviously. So you go through steps, then we have a polishing rouge, 3 steps of that. So not that you have to follow that exactly, like, go from, you know, you could probably start with a 320. I forget if this one is actually a 320, but this one, even that one's a nice one to have, just a big one. So yeah, it's a lot of detail work, but main point of this was, I just thought that was something interesting to note in your everyday physics that you don't necessarily think about, or could at least easily forget. Like, oh duh, like, this is under vacuum. I'm not thinking that it's okay for the air to travel up here a little, like, just to be available. So and create a larger area. So I think that's everything. I wasn't intending to talk for over 20 minutes, but this isn't easy stuff. It is and this is only one chapter. Like, the porting portion of the engine build is only one chapter. And then look at all this stuff. Like, and there's stuff over here. Some other burrs. I mean, this is just to take a factory economy casting and turn it into a performance part. So, but we're saving about $1,000 for the intake portion, because the trick flow, that's probably about the cost of that, and then that's not even really made for the truck anyway. So just all of this, as far like you're talking about, if we exclude the other heads, you're looking at, between the heads, the intake, and the plenum, I mean, not even including how long it took to degrease this sucker, and it still could use a little cleanup. I was thinking about polishing some areas so that it doesn't, obviously that's a steel plate, so it can rust up. But yeah, even this thing was caked. I mean, this was over 200,000 miles, and there's still some pockets. So what I may do is polish those pockets, right? Just to prevent, I've done that on the heads as well. And then you chamfer some of the return holes that kind of help with eliminating some sludge, because that sludge could build up, break away. I mean, your bearings have a degree of embeddability, but in a performance engine, it's, you know, you don't want to, if it's not a kind of beater, you kind of want to be as clean as possible, I guess. But bearings do have embeddability. Like, they're made to be able to take, because it's going to get in your engine, even with a good filter, debris, particles, metal shavings. You're going to have particulates that get in there, or trash, as we say. But anyway, between the heads, the intake, and the plenum, this job alone, then the degreasing, I mean, probably a solid 50 hours or more. And then I've done another pair of heads, and I'm not including that, and that was probably a 20 to 40 hour job. But that's like wearing a respirator, hunched over, doing like even a half hour to an hour worth of work on this stuff can feel like a very long time. But yeah, that's a full, more than a full week of something I do like very part time, doing 8 to 10 hour days. So it's pretty brutal. And that's, again, that's 1 degree, one chapter of the entire project. So that's just a chapter. One thing on the engine takes that long. The entire engine to put together and build will take like a few hours, if that. So anyway, that's all. But if you ever want to, you know, build an engine, learn about physics, airflow dynamics, what have you, now's the time to do it before they ban gasoline. And in my opinion, all elements, all physics are interesting. Whether you're building a hub, an electric hub motor for an ultralight, or working on like a diesel Volkswagen, whatever it is, now is the time to do it, especially in New York State, because it won't be long before everything's illegal. And what pisses me off about this, just a closing thought, what pisses me off about this is, just like people not understanding this fully, like why it, like, oh, it takes so long and blah blah blah, like people who get impatient about their cars in the shop, for example, is the same kind of people who don't understand mechanical engineering or internal combustion, and they really don't even understand the, like, anything about EVs or electronics even. They're so quick to turn their nose up at you, or like dismiss it, or basically be dismissive of the same people who are going to be leading the way for anything. So my point is, this is all one thing, right? Like, stop stereotyping people, especially people that are still playing with internal combustion, or who want to see it through to the end, because we know the setbacks, we understand air pollution. But if you're someone who drives a car and you have that attitude, is, I don't think you're a very good person. So I still love it all. I love monster trucks and race cars and all of that. I understand, but we also know fossil fuels don't last forever. They're going away. We understand there is a necessity for alternatives. It has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with what's available. It's not even a question of air quality, because if this was all we had, you know, they would still run it. I am still running full emissions. Like, I myself like clean air, don't get me wrong, but I do happen to love internal combustion, and I think it's the best sound in the world of a V8. Also other, you know, V10s and 12s, of course, and even some inline four cylinders, like motorcycles that have a 4-to-1 header and stuff. Well, all four cylinders technically have a 4-to-1, but you know what I mean. They're a little different. High RPM is what I'm really getting at. But the thing is people put it in camps, especially if you're a truck person. If you're a hot rodder, muscle cars, they put you into that camp like, oh, it's either Tesla or this. Well, who says you need an EV that goes 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds? Who says an electric Hummer needs to go that fast? Greed only changes colors. It's still the same. Obviously, but beyond lithium, because people are like, oh, lithium dangers and lithium brine and shortage and whatnot. We're already on to battery alternatives. Like, we're already looking at sodium batteries and stuff like that. But my point being is, try not to be dismissive of stuff like this or turn your nose down, because chances are that person knows that much more about many things than you do. So it's like Kathy Hochul, for example, in this state, they've banned aftermarket mufflers because their view is it's loud and obnoxious, and maybe people have abused it. But for people like me in the V8 world or truck world, or the like classic cars, like, it's a real piece of Americana. I think it's really sad that they've dismissed it and called it, oh, it's only for fear, intimidation, and chaos. And sure, it's like testosterone, but that's like banning someone from listening to heavy metal or something like that. So it's those kind of people that don't know anything dictating or regulating things really bothers me. For me personally, what the V8s do is it helps my anxiety, probably does something for testosterone. Is if I, even on YouTube, if I can watch some dirt cars race around and hear, you know, 358 modifieds or big blocks, like, there's something about it that I like. And yeah, it's the raw power. And I think that maybe there's some sort of sexism going on with that, with some of those women against what men are into. I know there's plenty of women that get it. There's plenty of great women race car drivers, but try, you know, don't stereotype, like, even politically, like, people have assumptions about like where I am as far, and it doesn't matter because it's none of your goddamn business, for one thing. But it's like, I'm tired of the judgment and stuff, you know, is like, it's like, oh, white trash or redneck or you don't know any. I'm telling you right now, some of the people that you're going to judge like that know that much more about physics and mechanical engineering than your son or daughter will ever know by not touching a piece of it. So they know more about thermodynamics, all of the above. So, and I'm not even trying to be braggadocious. I'm just saying I'm tired of it, because the amount of knowledge and intensive labor that has to go into this stuff can be incredible at times. You know, or people dismiss NASCAR without understanding just how complicated certain aspects beyond a regular engine have to go into that. Like, even uh, you know, maintaining valve lash and all of the things that become inherently more complicated because of the amount of not just the power but the endurance that the engine has to endure. And these people still get in their cars, whatever is available for me to go A to B, and they, without knowing anything, and then they judge people, or they make a law like, you can't be too loud, because they want to forget the reality of it too, and dismiss, you know, the people that they probably think they're better than, when they go into a shop and see someone covered in oil. And they wouldn't have anything. They wouldn't survive without people like that. And again, a lot of people into engines are into all physics. Like, everyone into an engine had an erector set with an electric motor, or plays with RC cars with electric motors. But still, there is a culture of like yuppies getting into EV that can just buy a Tesla that are now like dismissive, like, look how fast it is. Look what I can do. Look what I bought. And then there's another group of bad, you know, like truck guys. Like, I've seen like some diesel guys like unplug a Tesla, and then there's that whole element. And it's not the machine, it's the people. So stop dismissing mechanical engineering, just, or any, however you, whatever it is you think about it, whether you hate muscle cars, you hate vans and trucks, whatever. I know there's people out there that have kind of ruined it, like the sport compacts with their pop and crackle tune and the coal rolling shit, all these extremes, right? But there's those of us middle of the road, like I need to hear my V8, all right? So even in the future, hopefully we can still have a piston engine like that with hydrogen and still hear that sound while I'm still here. But just stop, because you don't know shit, all right? You don't know anything, and you don't know about the joys of doing something like this, because like most people, they probably don't have a hobby and they've never modified anything or done something that big. So I'm just tired of the stigma. um, I've kind of let it roll off my back now for many years, as you know, the world has been evolving while I'm on this particular project. But I'm just tired of it. And these same assholes get in an airplane and burn how many gallons of fuel, and already in the atmosphere, and the fuel that actually ends up coming down on you. So anyway, that's all for now.